You'd be surprised how many wounds are carved, not by strangers, but by the people who tuck you in at night. You'd be surprised how many voices echo in your mind not because they shouted but because they whispered with certainty. That night, she didn't yell. My mother never yelled when she meant to hurt you. She was folding napkins at the dinner table. The gold-rimmed ones we only brought out when my younger sister's boyfriend came over. The air smelled like roasted chicken and lemon-scented dish soap. My sister was glowing, laughing, her hand weighed down by a diamond that could blind satellites. And me. I was sitting at the far end, the extra chair pulled from the garage. Half a cushion, half a place in the family. My fork was midair when she said it. Honestly, my mother sighed, no one wants to marry someone like you. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was intentional. Crafted. My sister didn't even blink. Her boyfriend looked at me briefly, like someone glancing at a car accident. Then he sipped his wine. I put my fork down. What do you say to that? What can you say when your own mother states like the weather, like math that, you are unmarried? Didn't mean it like that. She added with that patronizing smile. I just worry, sweetheart, you're difficult always in your head. Not like your sister. Ah, there it was, not like your sister. Not like her long legs and perfect laugh and effortless femininity. Not like her clean Instagram feed and boyfriend who worked in private equity. Not like her Ivy League degree bought by the same parents who told me, we can't afford college twice. Not like her. The daughter they showed off. I was the daughter they explained away. You should be grateful you don't have to worry about appearances. She continued, as if I was a mouth without ears. You're so smart. You could do something useful, maybe help your sister with her wedding website. There it was again, that backhanded compliment, that sugar-coated knife. Be useful, like a tool, like a table, not like a person who deserves affection or celebration. I remember watching a drop of gravy crawl across my plate, thinking, is this what love is supposed to feel like? I didn't cry. Not then. I had learned by age 15 that tears were currency. They didn't accept in this house. Emotions were loud, and loud was embarrassing. After dinner, while my sister showed off her Pinterest board, I cleared the dishes in silence. That night, I stared at the ceiling in my childhood room, the same posters on the wall, the same smell of lavender detergent. I stared until the walls felt like they were folding in on me. Tell me, Cov, you ever had a moment where something inside you just snapped? Not loudly, not violently, just a click. Like a light switch. And suddenly, you knew you couldn't live one more day pretending this was okay. I had that moment at 3:12 a.m., the moonlight was slicing across my bed like a spotlight. And I whispered to myself, if I stay here, I'll forget who I am. And worse, I'll become who they say I am. I left home 2 weeks later, no dramatic goodbye. Just a note on the fridge and a duffel bag filled with second-hand clothes. A cracked laptop, and $274 in tips I'd saved from waitressing. I took a one-way bus ticket to the city. There's something sobering about arriving somewhere where no one is waiting for you. The apartment I found smelled like mildew and broken dreams. The floor creaked, the heating didn't work, and the woman downstairs screamed at her cat every morning. But it was mine. No one told me what I could or couldn't be in those four moldy walls. I took online courses, free boot camps, watched pirated coding tutorials until my eyes blurred. I drank black coffee and ate instant noodles for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I failed. A lot. Did you know humiliation tastes different when no one sees it? But every failure whispered something new. You're getting closer. People imagine rising from the ashes is beautiful. It's not. It's lonely, ugly, quiet. You're not applauded. You're forgotten. And maybe that's the gift, because when no one expects you to succeed, you get to build without noise. You get to grow without limits. They never checked on me, not once. Not a text, not a call, not even a forwarded meme. But that's okay. Because I wasn't building for them. I was building for the girl who stared at a gravy-stained plate while her mother stripped her of hope with a single sentence. I was building for the woman I wanted to become, someone who could walk into any room and know her worth, even if no one clapped. I was building for me, and you. What are you building for? Because if you've ever been told you're not enough, if you've ever been the person on the wrong side of the dinner table, then maybe you understand. Success isn't about proving them wrong, it's about proving to yourself that they never had the authority to define you in the first place. When I left home, I thought the hardest part would be surviving without support. I was wrong. The hardest part was unlearning the belief that I didn't deserve support in the first place. You don't just walk away from a house like that and become free. You carry it. In your spine. In your skin. In the way you flinch when someone raises their voice, even if they're not angry. In the city, I was no one. Just another girl with tired eyes and bad Wi-Fi, clicking through free trial after free trial. Learning to code from strangers on YouTube who sounded more like robots than humans. I would wake up with the sun bleeding through my thin curtains, stomach growling, head pounding, fingers aching. The first few weeks, I thought about giving up every single day. And when I say giving up, I don't mean just going back home, I mean stopping. Entirely. What kept me going? Honestly, spite. Pure hot ugly spite. There was something beautifully poisonous about remembering my mother's voice. No one wants to marry someone like you. Every time I wanted to quit, I heard that sentence again. And again. And again. And every time, I whispered back, watch me. I got a job cleaning tables at a cafe that smelled like sour milk and broken espresso machines. The manager called me, girl, because he couldn't remember my name, even after 3 months. But I didn't care. I worked the early shift and used their free Wi-Fi during breaks to learn how to build landing pages. One night, I stayed at the cafe past closing. I forgot to lock the door behind me. A woman walked in. Blazer, loafers, tired but sharp. I thought you were closed, she said. I apologized. She looked at the code on my screen. You studying? She asked. I nodded, trying. She tilted her head. That's HTML, right? I used to code. Those 4 words changed everything. Turned out, she was the CTO of a small fintech startup. She'd started in a basement, just like I did. I didn't beg for help, I just asked if I could buy her a coffee sometime and ask questions. She said, no, then added, but come by the office Monday. We're looking for interns. That was my first real break. The startup paid peanuts and expected miracles, but I didn't care. I sat in every meeting, took notes, Googled every term I didn't understand. I worked late, offered to fix things no one wanted to touch. And slowly, painfully, I stopped feeling like I was faking it. I got my first real paycheck 2 months later, $368.42. I held it in my hands like it was a gold medal. I didn't spend it. Not immediately. I just looked at it, because for the first time in my life, I had proof that I could create value, that I was not, in fact, useless, that I was not, in fact, disposable, that I was not, in fact, what they said. But pain has a long memory. One afternoon, I was scrolling through social media when I saw it. My sister, in a white dress, champagne in hand, surrounded by flowers and fairy lights. The caption, engaged to the love of my life. I can't wait to be Mrs. Carter. The ring was massive. My throat tightened. Not out of jealousy, out of habit. Because I knew what came next. And sure enough, 2 hours later, my phone rang. Have you seen your sister's post? My mother asked, voice high like a songbird. Isn't it beautiful? It is, I said quietly. She's going to marry a director. Can you believe it? She laughed, like the world was finally turning properly again. I said nothing. And you? What are you doing these days? She asked, as if the answer would be amusing. I wanted to say, I'm interning at a tech company. I built a product page last week that improved user retention by 17%. My boss actually asked for my opinion in a meeting yesterday. Instead, I just said, working. A pause. Well, keep trying, she replied. Maybe someone will want you eventually. Click. I stared at the blank phone screen for a long time. Then I opened my laptop, and I started building my own damn website, because if the world wasn't going to hand me a seat at the table, I'd build my own table. And one day, they'd be asking me for a seat. You know what's funny? The world celebrates overnight success, but it never sees the nights. The real nights. The ones where your back sticks to a plastic chair. Your vision blurs from the screen light, and the only thing keeping you upright is the quiet ache of being underestimated. That's what my 20s were made of. 1,000 invisible nights. While my sister picked table linens and wedding florists, I picked up discarded feature requests and bug tickets no one else wanted to touch. While she posed for engagement photos in Tuscany, I was sleeping for hours a night on a mattress that sunk in the middle, dreaming in code and caffeine hallucinations. She had a whole team planning her future. I had a Trello board and 2 cracked mugs. And yet, something shifted. The startup I interned at got acquired. The new CEO noticed me, not because I was loud but because I got *T done, quietly, ruthlessly, consistently. He called me into his office one Friday. "I don't usually do this," he said, leaning back in his chair. "But we're building out a new vertical. I want you on it?" I blinked. "I'm still just an intern," I said. He grinned. "Exactly. You're the only one here who doesn't come with baggage." That's how I became a junior product developer. Then, a project lead. Then, a product manager. And eventually, I was offered equity. Tiny. At first, a sliver of a sliver. But that sliver was mine. It meant I could build something that no one could take away. That's the part they never tell you. Success doesn't come with trumpets. It comes with unread emails and Sunday sprints and cheap mascara that holds through board meetings. It comes with knowing how to negotiate, even when your voice shakes. It comes with learning how to say no when your childhood taught you to whisper, "Is this okay?" 3 years passed. I didn't speak to my family during most of that time. My sister sent the occasional forwarded meme or "hope you're well" DM, but my mother. Silence. And still, I grew. I started mentoring other women trying to break into tech, women who had stories like mine: ignored daughters, overlooked students, forgotten interns. I helped build scholarships, pushed for more inclusive hiring practices, donated to bootcamp programs. It wasn't charity, it was reclamation. Every time I reached back and pulled someone up, I pulled away a piece of the narrative I'd been handed, that I was unlovable, unworthy, unmarriable. Then one Thursday morning, everything changed. I was presenting a case study at a national tech conference, half exhilarated, half nauseous, when a tall man in a tailored navy suit approached me afterward. "Built the interface for Greenlight Banking, right?" he asked. I nodded. "I've seen your work. I'm Daniel Monroe, CEO of Novacor." Novacor. The biggest tech conglomerate in the country. My palms instantly sweated. "We're building a new AI platform. I want you leading the product team," he said, like it was already decided. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. The lights above us buzzed softly, and I remember thinking, this moment feels too quiet for how big it is. That night, I signed a contract, VP of Product, Novacor Industries. Salary, more than my entire family's combined income for the last 5 years. Stock options, international travel, full creative autonomy. I laughed, not out loud, but inside, because for the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was undeniable. A week later, the press release went live. Novacor announces new VP of Product, tech prodigy, Emma Williams. It was everywhere, and then my phone lit up. Over and over and over again, missed calls, unknown numbers, voicemails I didn't listen to. Then one text: "Mom, is it true? Are you really working with Daniel Monroe?" I stared at the screen. My stomach turned, not from nerves, from recognition. She didn't ask how I was. Didn't say congratulations. She asked about a man, a powerful man. Because to her, my worth still depended on proximity to someone else's. I didn't respond, but the next week, I got an invitation in the mail. My sister's wedding, no note, no personal message, just a white envelope and a card with glittery gold script. "We'd love for you to join us as we celebrate love, family, and forever. Love, family. Forever." The irony was a punchline. I hadn't been invited to Christmas in 3 years, not even Thanksgiving, but now that I had a title, now that the world had changed its tune, I was family again. No, they didn't want me. They wanted the version of me they could brag about. The shiny Emma, the VP Emma. The worth showing off at a wedding Emma. I stood in front of the mirror that night and stared at myself, not the girl who cleared plates while her sister giggled about diamond cuts. Not the girl who coded until her fingers cramped, not the girl who whispered someday like a prayer. The woman in the mirror had power, and she owed no one an explanation, but she did have a choice to show up. And make them see her, really see her, on her terms. I didn't RSVP right away. I let that invitation sit on my kitchen counter, unopened, for 3 days. Not because I was too busy, but because I was afraid of what opening it meant, of what it would wake up in me. You see, it's one thing to survive without your family. It's another to be invited back into their orbit, as a guest, not a daughter, not a sister, just a name on a list, someone to dress nicely and fill a seat. I could almost hear my mother's voice again. "She's successful now, you know. Big company. Something to do with computers. Not we're proud of her. Not we were wrong. Just a social point. A notch on a belt she didn't earn. but eventually, curiosity won. I peeled back the envelope. The wedding would be at some estate in upstate New York. Marble floors, valet parking, a horse-drawn carriage for show. Of course. My sister always did love theatrics. It was all so performative. The dress code, elegant, evening attire. I almost laughed. Not because I couldn't meet the expectation, but because 3 years ago, my closet had been nothing but thrift store blazers and shoes with soles that whispered, "Please hold together." Now, I had stylists on speed dial. But this wasn't about clothes. This was about space and weather. I could walk into a room full of people who had once called me a failure and hold my head higher than they thought possible, so I went not for them. For me, the day of the wedding, the sky was cloudless. The estate looked like something out of a movie. Stone arches, rose-covered trellises, waiters carrying flutes of champagne with ribbons tied around the stems. I wore navy blue, structured shoulders, hair slicked back. No jewelry but my company's custom pin, small and sharp on my lapel, as I stepped out of the car. Heads turned. A few people blinked like they'd seen a ghost. Then came the whispers. Is that Emma? She looks different. Damn right I did. I wasn't the girl who sat in the kitchen eating leftovers anymore. I wasn't the punchline at dinner. I wasn't their failure. I was the woman they didn't think could exist. I walked past the garden, into the reception area. And there she was. My mother. Her dress was champagne-colored, her makeup impeccable, her face frozen somewhere between surprise and calculation. "Emma," she said, blinking. I just nodded. "Look at you," she continued, voice tilting up like she wasn't sure whether to compliment me or claim credit. "You've grown into yourself." I didn't smile. I didn't thank her. I just said, "I know." She cleared her throat. "Your sister will be thrilled you're here." "Is she?" My mother hesitated. "Well, she's a bit stressed. Big day, you know." I nodded again. Not because I agreed, but because I saw it now so clearly that even in this moment, she couldn't give me anything real. No apology, no affection, just script. I found my seat, on the chart. Table 9. Not with the family, not even close. I was sandwiched between a tech investor from my sister's fiancé's side and someone's yoga instructor. Table 9 was the networking table. Because that's what I was now. A valuable connection. Not blood, not belonging. Just leverage. Still, I smiled politely, made conversation, let them fawn over my title, pretend they had followed my rise. One woman leaned over and said, "You know, your mother talks about you all the time now." Now. That word cut deeper than I expected, because it confirmed everything. It meant that before now, I was invisible. Before now, I was shame. Before now, I was the daughter they never introduced. But now, I had worth because I had something they could hold up. The ceremony began. My sister looked beautiful, really, genuinely. She was glowing, radiant, drenched in soft white lace and a smile that looked like a billboard. And yet, I couldn't help but wonder, was she happy, or just successful in the way our mother defined it? Because the man she was marrying, he barely looked at her, barely touched her arm, barely smiled. He glanced at his phone during the vows, and that's when I realized something. I had spent years thinking I was the one who lost, that I was the outsider, the disappointment, but watching her, all dressed up, all admired, all positioned, I didn't envy her. I pitied her, because while I had clawed my way into a life I chose, she had inherited a role she was still auditioning for. During the reception, she finally found me. "Emma," she breathed, clutching her bouquet. "You came." I looked at her. Really looked at her. She had the same eyes as me, the same scar on her thumb from when we were kids, but there was a tiredness in her smile that didn't belong at a wedding. "I did," I said. She bit her lip. "Listen, I know we haven't been close." That was one way to say it. "But I just want you to know, I'm proud of you." I raised an eyebrow. "You don't need to say that," I replied. "Especially if it's just for tonight." She winced. "I mean it," she said, softer. "What you built, who you've become, it's incredible. I know Mom didn't see it. Not back then, but I did. I just didn't say anything." "Why not?" "That's what I wanted to ask. Why didn't you stand up for me? Why did you let her call me a mistake, a burden, a waste?" But I didn't, because in that moment, I realized something even more powerful. I didn't need her validation anymore. I didn't need any of theirs. We talked for a few more minutes. I hugged her, briefly, and handed her a small envelope. "Wedding gift." I said. Inside was a check. Not extravagant, but enough to matter. She looked shocked. Emma, put it toward something you want, I told her. Not mom, not him, you. And I walked away. Not bitter, not broken, just whole. 3 weeks after the wedding, my phone rang just after midnight. It was a number I didn't recognize, New Jersey area code. I debated letting it go to voicemail. I had just returned from a summit in Berlin and was jet-lagged beyond reason, lying in my king-sized bed, wrapped in the stillness of success, but something in my chest pulled me to answer. Hello, Emma. The voice was quiet, hesitant, familiar. It was my brother. We hadn't spoken in nearly 4 years. Not since he told me to stop embarrassing the family and suggested I get a real job, as if coding freelance apps at a greasy diner between shifts at the pharmacy wasn't a real job. He cleared his throat. I didn't know if this number still worked. It does, I said flatly. There was a long pause. Then, I saw you. At the wedding, you didn't say anything. I couldn't. A beat passed between us. What do you want, Matthew? He exhaled slowly. I'm sorry. It took me a moment to realize I had stopped breathing. That word sorry, it landed on me like snow. Quiet, cold, beautiful, and far too late. For what, exactly? For not calling, for not defending you, for everything. I sat up. Why now? I asked. Why not when I was crashing on a stranger's couch, eating canned beans and crying myself to sleep? Why not when mom called me a disgrace, and you just sat there? He sighed. Because I was scared. Of what? Of turning out like you. There it was, the truth. And yet, it didn't sting the way I thought it might, because in that moment I understood. His silence wasn't just apathy, it was fear. My independence, my refusal to follow the family script threatened the fragile world he had bought into, and he chose comfort over courage. I replied evenly. You say that like being like me would have been a curse. It wasn't. Not anymore, he said. Emma, you're the only one in this family who didn't fold. He told me he'd been struggling. That the real estate firm he'd joined through our uncle had laid off half its staff, and he was one of them. That his marriage was on the rocks. That, for the first time in his life, he felt small. Now I get it, he said. What it must have felt like. All those years. I wanted to scream to tell him it wasn't about understanding me, now that I had power. That his empathy, arriving only after his fall, tasted more like survival than sincerity. But instead, I said, Matthew, you don't get to come to me as a brother just because you're in the valley. I know, he whispered, but I didn't know who else to call. That was the thing, wasn't it? When I was down, I had no one. Not him, not anyone. But now that I had risen, they all remembered my number. The next day, I got another call. This time, it was from my mother. No hesitation in her voice, no quiet sorrow, just her usual clipped, calculating tone. Emma, I heard you spoke to your brother. I did. Well, I think it's time we repaired things. As a family. I almost laughed. Why? I'm your mother, she said, stiffly, and families should stay together. No, I corrected. Families should show up. You didn't show up when I needed rent money, or when I almost dropped out of college, or when I cried myself to sleep on Christmas Eve. You only show up now that I have something you want. She bristled. Don't be dramatic. Dramatic, I echoed, my voice sharp. You told me no one would ever want to marry me. That I'd be lucky to bag groceries. You made sure I knew I was less. There was silence. Then, a brittle response. That was a different time. No, that was you, and you haven't changed. She tried to guilt me, said my father missed me. He didn't. Said my sister had been so happy to see me. She had. Then she slipped in the real reason. There's a gala next month, she said, like it was a casual afterthought. Your father's being honored. It would mean a lot if you were there. Just for the photo. Of course. The photo. The public image. The shiny illusion of a loving, united family with their successful daughter in the center. That was what this was all about. My success was no longer inconvenient. Now it was profitable. I won't be there, I said quietly. She faltered. Excuse me, you heard me. But why? Because I'm not a prop in your little play, Mother. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to keep circling this orbit, this black hole of conditional love and emotional manipulation. I had built a life with my own 2 hands, brick by brick, code by code. And I would not let them re-enter it just because it now gleamed with gold. I called my assistant and gave her a list of charities, women's shelters, immigrant support organizations, scholarship funds for girls in tech. I wanted my money to go where it would matter, where it would mean something. Not to a family who only loved me now that they could introduce me. Here's the truth, they never taught me. Success doesn't heal you, but it does give you a mirror. And when I looked into mine, I saw a woman who no longer needed to be loved by people who refused to see her. A woman who could choose her own family, her own circle, her own worth. So I began again, not by erasing the past, but by owning it. You know, they say forgiveness sets you free. But what they don't tell you is this: sometimes it's the distance that truly liberates you. I didn't go to the gala. Instead, I flew to Edinburgh for a panel on women in tech leadership. My husband, yes, that husband, the same man my mother once said wouldn't exist for someone like me, sat in the front row. He beamed like I held the sun itself. The panel ended, and a young girl, maybe 17, came up to me. Her hands were trembling. She had tearful eyes and a voice like glass. She said, "I thought I was broken, because my family keeps telling me I'm not enough, that I'll never make it. But then I watched your talk, and I realized, maybe I don't have to prove anything to them." I took her hand and squeezed it gently. "You don't," I whispered. "You just have to prove it to yourself. And that's more than enough." That moment stayed with me long after I returned home. It followed me into the silence of my study, where the view overlooked the skyline I used to dream about from a mattress. On the floor, you see, when you've been told all your life that your voice is too loud, your dreams too big, your desires too inconvenient, you either shrink, or you break the walls. I chose to shatter every single one. But what they don't prepare you for, after the victory, is the echo, the quiet space where the applause dies down. And you realize, the very people you longed to impress weren't even watching. They never were. 1 week later, I received an email from my sister. No subject line, just a single sentence. "I wish I'd believed in you when it mattered." I sat there staring at it, not because I was shocked but because, deep down, some childlike part of me had always waited for that line, that admission, but it didn't land the way I thought it would. There were no tears, no catharsis, just a quiet nod of acknowledgement, like finishing the last page of a book you outgrew long ago. I replied, "I believe in you now. I always have." No venom, no bitterness, just truth. And I hit send. I thought about that email days later, sitting in a board meeting as the youngest executive in the room, while men in suits twice my age asked for my approval on a deal, and I realized I had rewritten my own legacy. Not by begging to sit at their table, but by building my own. One chair at a time, one decision at a time, one act of courage at a time. My husband, Noah, yes, let's finally say his name, because he deserves more than being the shadow behind my success, invited my parents to our anniversary gala. I didn't know until the night of. I spotted them near the entrance, dressed sharply, eyes scanning the crowd like tourists in a foreign land. They looked smaller than I remembered, not physically but spiritually, like time had folded them in. My mother walked toward me, her face stretched into that polite, performative smile she'd used all my life. The smile she wore when guests visited or when she needed a favor. "Emma," she said, voice like porcelain. "You look," she trailed off. "You can say it," I told her. "It won't break your jaw." "Beautiful," she whispered. "You look beautiful." I thanked her, and for a moment, we just stood there, not as mother and daughter, but as two women who had survived entirely different wars. She reached out to hug me. I let her. It wasn't warm. It wasn't cold either, just obligatory. After, she looked at me with those pale eyes and said, "We're so proud of what you've become." And here, dear listener, is where the final fracture cracked. Because what I've become. No, this wasn't some accidental evolution. It wasn't some passive transformation she could now admire from a distance. I didn't become something. I built it. Out of nights alone. Out of rejection. Out of hunger. Both literal and figurative. Out of coding by candlelight when I couldn't pay the electric bill. Out of silence. Out of the cold absence of a mother's love. So I looked her dead in the eye and said, "You don't get to be proud of a garden you never watered." They left early. My father didn't say a word. He never really did, and I didn't follow them. I didn't ache after them. I didn't relive childhood fantasies of a family I never really had. Instead, I walked back into the ballroom, where my real family stood. No, not by blood, by choice, my team, my friends, my husband. The girls I mentored. The women I funded. The people who saw me not for who they wanted me to be but for who I was. I raised a glass dot, and for the first time, I toasted, not to revenge, but to peace. Here's what no one tells you when you finally win. It's not the money, it's not the titles, it's not the I told you so. It's the fact that you no longer need any of it to know who you are, because even if the whole empire burned down tomorrow, I'd still have my spine. And that's the real success. Peace isn't loud. It doesn't crash through the door, like pain does. It's soft, still, so quiet that at first I mistook it for loneliness. After the gala, after the stares and the stiff smiles and that empty toast with my mother, I remember waking up the next morning to birdsong and a kind of silence I hadn't known in years. Not silence from rejection, not silence from being ignored, but silence that came from no longer needing their voices at all. When I was a teenager, I used to fantasize about a single moment. My mother sitting in the front row, watching me win something, an award, a scholarship, a standing ovation, tears in her eyes as she finally saw me. What I wanted wasn't applause. It was recognition. That primal, desperate need for a parent to say, "You mattered." I was wrong, but here's what no one warns you about. Sometimes, even when that moment comes, it doesn't feel like you thought it would, because by the time it finally arrives, you've already learned to live without it. A few weeks after the gala, my mother sent me a package. I hesitated before opening it. The last gift she gave me had been a second-hand sweater 2 sizes too small, and her disapproving glare. That was 5 years ago. Inside this box, a photo album from my childhood. It was old and musty. The pages yellowed at the edges. She'd scribbled something on the first page in shaky cursive. "You've always been stronger than I could handle." I sat there for a long time, staring at those words. Not quite an apology. Not quite a confession, just a sentence. Half truth, half fear, and then I flipped through the photos. There, I was 5 years old, holding up a science fair trophy, grinning at the camera, 10, building a fort out of chairs and blankets, surrounded by books, 17, standing alone. At my graduation, while my parents sat in the car, they were there, technically, but they were never present. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just closed the book and put it back in the box, and I walked over to the fire pit in the garden and dropped it in. Because some memories aren't sacred, they're heavy, and I wasn't going to carry hers anymore. You might think that sounds cruel, but you've never felt what it's like to finally breathe without asking for permission, to live without turning your success into a performance for people who never clapped for you. I had spent too many years hoping they'd come around. What I should have done was walk away sooner. The media loved our story. Mine and Noah's. Power couple of the year. From underestimated to unstoppable. They asked for interviews, exposes, think pieces. They wanted to know about the rise, the romance, the ruthlessness, but none of them ever asked about the hollow parts. The dinner tables, I wasn't invited. To dot the voicemail my mother left the night of my college graduation. "It's just not worth the drive, sweetheart." The Christmas morning where they gave my brother a car, and me a frying pan. The way they looked at me, always like I was too much, too smart, too opinionated, too hungry. No journalist ever asked about that, but you should know, because success isn't just about what you build, it's about what you survive. A few months later, my younger cousin messaged me on Instagram. She was 19, studying computer science. She told me she wanted to drop out because her family said she wasn't smart enough. Sound familiar? She said, "They keep telling me I should just find a rich man." I replied, "Be the rich woman." And then I flew her out for a week. She stayed with us. She sat in on my meetings. I let her shadow my team. I introduced her to other women in tech. I told her the truth about the loneliness, the fear, the grit. Not the polished fairy tale, but the real path. When she left, she hugged me so tight, it nearly broke me. She said, "Thank you for showing me it's possible." And I realized this is the table I wanted all along. Not my mother's dining room. Not the family holidays where I was seated with the children, while my brother got to carve the turkey. This table, my table. Built from scars, not silver. Filled with people who see me not the version they wanted, but the woman I chose to become. I don't speak to my parents much anymore, not because I hate them, but because peace requires boundaries, and I no longer confuse proximity with love. Once in a while, my mother sends a text, usually after reading about me in some article. "I saw your face in the Times. That red dress suited you." I reply politely, but I don't reach out. I don't invite her in. Because love without accountability isn't love, it's convenience, and I'm no longer for their convenience. You want to know what the hardest part of healing is? It's giving up the fantasy of what could have been, letting it die. Standing over its grave, saying, "You never existed, but I still rose." And then walking away, not bitter, not broken, but free. So here I am, wife of a CEO, founder of my own firm, mentor, speaker, builder of empires, and restorer of broken beliefs. But most importantly, I'm whole. Not because they finally saw me, but because I stopped waiting for them to. There was a family dinner held a year after my wedding, a rare event that brought everyone together: cousins, uncles, aunts, siblings. The kind of evening where you can smell the tension just beneath the surface of laughter, where the food is seasoned, but the conversation bland and rehearsed. I hadn't planned to go. I hadn't set foot in my parents' house in over 2 years, but my grandmother called me, her voice frail but certain. "I don't know how many more dinners I'll get, love," she said. "Come just for me." So I did, but I made a few quiet decisions beforehand. 1. I brought Noah, because he's my anchor when the waters turn cold. 2. I booked a car that would wait outside in gin on. Driver briefed. 3. I promised myself that if they tried to dim my light again, I wouldn't shrink, I would burn. When we walked in, the room fell quiet for a breath. My brother, always the center of attention, glanced up from his seat and smirked. My mother, seated at the head of the table, raised her glass in mock surprise. "Well, she made it," she said. Noah's grip on my waist tightened, just a little. I smiled back. "Yes," I said. "And I brought the man no one thought would marry me." The silence that followed was delicious. You could taste the discomfort in the air, like overcooked lamb. We were ushered to our seats, of course, not at the main end of the table. That seat was reserved for my brother's fiancée, a woman who worked in fashion PR and once posted on Instagram that reading books was too much effort. But Noah and I didn't need a prime seat. We brought our own presence with us, and they noticed. Every time I spoke, heads turned. Every time Noah reached for my hand or offered to pour me wine, eyes followed. My brother tried to steer the conversation back to himself, his new investment portfolio, his promotion. But people kept turning toward me. I didn't brag, I didn't interrupt, I just told the truth when asked, and the truth, for once, was enough. Midway through the meal, my mother leaned in. "You look well," she said. There was a pause. "Marriage has been good to you." I looked at her. This woman who had once told me that love was for pretty girls, that success was for boys, that I was too loud, too sensitive, too difficult to ever be loved. "Marriage hasn't made me," I said. "I did that myself." She blinked, and I saw something flicker in her eyes, maybe resentment, maybe regret, maybe just the ache of realizing she hadn't broken me. At the end of the night, my uncle stood to give a toast. "To family," he said, raising his glass. "To old traditions and new blessings." I stayed quiet, because sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's sovereignty. But as people began to murmur their goodbyes and gather their coats, I noticed something peculiar. The waiter handed my mother the bill. She frowned. I thought this was, "Who paid for this?" The waiter nodded at me. "I was instructed to charge everything to Miss Williams' account." All eyes turned. And in that instant, I felt it again, that crackle in the air, that slow, dawning realization creeping across their faces. Because they'd spent years treating me like the girl who'd always need help, and now, I was the one feeding them. After everyone left, I stayed behind for a moment. The restaurant was quiet. My mother stood by the doorway, coat draped over her shoulders like royalty without a throne. "Why would you pay for all this?" she asked. Her voice wasn't curious. It was suspicious, almost hostile. "Because I could," I replied. "And because I wanted to." "You always do that," she said. "Make statements. Take up space." "No," I said calmly. "I finally take up space. You just never let me before." She didn't respond. Just adjusted her scarf and looked away. "Did you like the wine?" I asked, and she nodded. "Well, the vineyard's mine now. Part of a new acquisition." She froze, and for the first time in my life, I watched my mother truly process who I'd become. Not just a daughter, not just a woman, but a force. The car ride home was quiet. Noah reached for my hand and didn't let go. "You okay?" he asked. I looked out at the city, its lights, its chaos, its relentless beauty. "I think I'm done trying to impress ghosts," I said. Because that night, I realized something crucial. I'd Always been trying to buy a seat at their table. When the truth was I'd already built a better one, with crystal they couldn't afford. With chairs wide enough to hold my whole self. With room for laughter, and joy, and fierce, protective love, and no one at my table ever had to earn their worth. They just had to bring their truth. Do you understand what that means? Do you know what it feels like to stop chasing approval and start building sanctuary? Let me tell you, it feels like coming home to yourself. There are people who will always see you as you were. Not who you are, not who you're becoming. Just the faded version they keep locked in a family scrapbook, where you were still small, still unsure, still needing them, but growth doesn't ask for permission. It just happens, and one day, you walk into a room and no longer fit into the shape they remember. You outgrow their limitations, and suddenly they have to reckon with who you really are, or lose you forever. I'm not angry anymore, but I'm not small anymore either, and that, I've learned, is the kind of peace that changes everything. 3 weeks after the dinner, my brother showed up at my office, unannounced. It was a Monday morning. The air outside was bitter with late winter's teeth, and my office was glowing with soft amber light from the floor-to-ceiling windows. I had just ended a call with our marketing director when my assistant buzzed in. "Miss Williams, there's a Mr. Jackson here. Says he's your brother." I paused, staring at the receiver. The last time he'd called me sis, I was 18, and begging him to cover for me when I missed curfew. The next time he'd called me at all, well, he hadn't. I opened the door myself. He looked different, not quite broken, but cracked in places, hair disheveled, tie crooked, eyes heavy, like someone who hadn't slept the night before, the week before. He tried a smile. "Hey," I stepped aside. He walked in, moving like someone who wasn't sure if they belonged. My office was modern, warm, and unapologetically elegant. The kind of space no one in my family had ever imagined for me, especially not him. He didn't sit until I told him to. "I got laid off," he said bluntly. "They're downsizing." Or that's what they told me. I nodded, arms crossed, and I need a job. The silence between us was dense. I could feel the weight of all the unspoken things hovering above our heads. Years of his backhanded jabs, the birthday he skipped because his girlfriend at the time didn't like small family gatherings. The smirk on his face when mom called me a burden and no one said a word to defend me. I breathed deeply. "What kind of job are you looking for?" He shifted in his chair. "Something in management. I have experience in operations, client relations. You know that?" I nodded again. "I do. I also know, you used to call me a charity case when I was working 2 jobs to keep the lights on." His eyes flicked down. "I didn't mean it. You said it." He looked up, his expression tighter now. "Look, I'm not here to relive the past. I'm your brother. I need help." And there it was. Not an apology, not reflection, just need, as currency, as leverage, as assumed entitlement. And for a moment, I wanted to give in, to soften, to extend my hand and say, "Yes, of course, come in. I've saved a place for you." But I'd done that too many times. And each time, they took the seat and laughed at the host. "I'm not saying no," I said calmly. "But if you want a job here, you'll have to earn it like everyone else." He scoffed. "You'd make your own brother apply." "I'd make my husband apply." "Jackson, this isn't a family favor. It's a company. My company." His mouth twitched. "What would Dad say?" And that right there, that was the last thread snapping. "What would Dad say?" I repeated, slowly. "You mean the man who told me I was wasting my time with dreams? Who said I was never going to be anyone?" "That Dad." He swallowed. I leaned forward. "He's not the voice I follow anymore, and he shouldn't be yours, either." He sat back, quiet, still, and for once, I think he heard me, not just the words, but the woman behind them. The one he never made room for. The one he had to reckon with now. I gave him a task, something low-level, temporary, just to test his initiative. Not a handout. Whether he climbed or let go was on him. As he left, he paused at the door. "You really built all this," he murmured, half to himself. I looked around the office, the framed press article, the awards, the photo of Noah and me in Tuscany, both laughing with sunburned cheeks. "I did," I said. "And no one handed me the blueprint." He nodded once, and left. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Noah traced circles on my shoulder. "Did it feel good?" he asked softly. "To have the upper hand?" I shook my head. "No, it felt like closing a wound." Because revenge isn't the high they promise you in movies. What's sweeter? Clarity. Boundaries. Power that doesn't need to be shouted to be understood. And if you've ever been where I was, if your hands are still trembling from holding doors open for people who wouldn't do the same, you know this: there's no peace like the kind you build for yourself. No silence like the kind that comes after you stop begging to be heard. No home like the one inside your own skin. He might never thank me. My mother might never apologize, but I'm no longer waiting at the gates of their affection. I am the gate, and only those who carry love and respect in their hands may enter. It was a sunny Saturday when she came. No call, no text, no warning, just the sharp sound of the intercom in our penthouse, interrupting the soft jazz playing in the background as Noah sautéed mushrooms in the kitchen and I folded laundry with the windows open to the skyline. I walked over and pressed the button. Who is it? A pause. Then her voice, crisp and unmistakably hers. It's your mother. I didn't answer for a full 10 seconds. The air inside the apartment felt suddenly too thick, too still. Noah looked over. Eyes alert. She's downstairs, I said, quietly. She just came. He turned off the burner, wiped his hands, and walked to me. You don't have to let her in. I know. And yet I pressed the button to unlock the door. Not because I owed her grace, but because I owed myself the truth. When the elevator opened, she stepped out like she belonged, hair perfectly sprayed into place. Lips painted the same severe mauve she'd worn all my life. But her eyes looked different. Tired. Almost anxious. She didn't smile. She simply looked around the living room, like she was scanning the terrain of a foreign country. It's beautiful, she said after a beat. I nodded. Thank you. Another pause. I didn't come to fight. I tilted my head. No, that would be new. She sighed, not dramatically. Not like the martyr she used to pretend to be. Just exhausted. Came because your brother told me what you said. And because I realized, I don't even know who you are anymore. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. That makes two of us. We sat across from each other. Noah quietly stepped into the study, giving us space. She looked older than I remembered. Or maybe I had just stopped seeing her through the lens of childhood. I said awful things, she began. I didn't interrupt. I told you. No one would want to marry someone like you. I said you were difficult. Emotional. Too much. I held her gaze. You didn't say it once. You said it over and over. Until I believed it. She nodded. I know. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the glass of water I'd set down. I said it because I was afraid, she continued. Afraid that you'd never be safe without conforming. That being soft in this world would get you broken. I exhaled. A bitter laugh caught in my throat. So your solution was to break me first? She winced. I thought if I made you harder, sharper, you'd survive. I leaned forward. I didn't survive because you tried to crush me. I survived in spite of it. The silence after that was long, uncomfortable, necessary. She looked down. I've seen the interviews. She whispered. The gala. The foundation you and Noah started. You're respected, admired. I'm not asking for your approval, I said. I stopped needing it the moment I stopped asking to be chosen. Her eyes glistened. I know. And yet, I added, my voice quieter now, here you are. The words that came next weren't grand. There was no teary apology. No hugging embrace. No Hollywood crescendo. Just this. I'm sorry. I didn't know how to be the mother you needed, and I might never fully know. But I see now that you didn't need fixing. You needed believing in. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to cry in her presence, because I wasn't small anymore. I wasn't seeking warmth from a closed door. I was the door. She left after half an hour. Not all questions answered. Not all wounds healed. But something had shifted. A tilt in the orbit. A slow cracking open. Noah came back out, kissed my forehead gently. How do you feel? He asked. I stared out at the skyline. The city I'd made my own. The life no one handed me. Like I finally stopped dragging her ghost behind me, I whispered. And now I can walk forward without chains. He nodded. Proud of you. And, for once, the pride didn't feel like a borrowed coat, it fit. Later that night, I reread an old journal entry from the days when I lived in a basement apartment and worked 3 jobs to afford night school. The handwriting was shaky. One day, I'll be someone no one can ignore. Not out of revenge, but out of radiance. I smiled. Because I had become her, and more. If you're still carrying the echoes of someone who told you you were too much, too little, or to anything, this is your sign. Let them be wrong. Let you be right. Right in your heart, right in your fight, right in your worth. Because no one gets to define your destiny. Not even the people who gave you your name. It had been almost a year since my mother showed up uninvited, and in that time, we had exchanged a few cautious messages, a holiday card, and one brittle lunch at a neutral cafe where the soup was lukewarm and the conversation even colder. But then came the wedding, my cousin Elise, the family's golden girl, marrying into some well-connected Southern dynasty. Everyone was going to be there. Everyone. And I received an invitation. Addressed formally, with a little handwritten note at the bottom. Would be lovely if you came. Everyone would be happy to see you. Everyone. What a loaded word. Noah offered to go with me, of course, but I told him I needed to walk into that ballroom alone. Not because I didn't want him beside me, but because some ghosts you have to face without armor. I wore a navy silk gown, tailored to my shape with a slit that whispered power but never shouted. My hair was swept up, not for elegance, but for control. Control over how I presented myself. Control over how I walked in. Not the forgotten girl anymore. Not the burden. Not the disappointment. The moment I stepped into the venue, I felt it, that rustle of attention, the unspoken buzz in the room. Some faces lit up with forced smiles, others faltered, a few whispered behind napkins and champagne flutes. And then there was my mother standing near the cake table, eyes tracking me like a hawk who hadn't decided whether I was prey or proof of her regret. We locked eyes. I nodded. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. Aunt Patricia came over first, plastic smile glued in place. She had always been the most vocal about my life choices, the one who once said to my face, "Well, at least your sister gave your parents something to be proud of." "Darling," she cooed now, kissing the air beside my cheek. "I've seen you on television lately. That CNN interview's so articulate." "Really? ... Surprising." I smiled. "Yes, well, they say when you're ignored long enough, you either learn to disappear or articulate." I chose the latter. Her lips twitched. "Still sharp, I see." "Sharper now," I said, sipping my wine. "You'd be amazed what a lack of affection can hone." I mingled. I greeted people. I accepted their compliments without shrinking. I made no effort to shrink. In fact, I took up space not rudely, not flamboyantly, but with the steady weight of someone who knows who she is and no longer asks permission to be. And then came the part no one expected, the toast. My cousin, Elise, all sunshine and satin, tapped her champagne glass and called for silence. She thanked everyone for coming, spoke of love, of gratitude, of the ways family builds the scaffolding of our lives, and then, smiling wide, she said, "There's someone here I want to thank, especially." She showed me that women in this family can build empires. That we don't have to be what others define. "Natalie, could you stand?" The room turned. Every eye fell on me. I stood slowly, calmly, not flustered, not embarrassed, just present. Elise raised her glass. "To the cousin who reminded me that your worth isn't in how sweetly you shrink, but how boldly you stand." To Natalie. There was applause. Scattered, uneven. Some were genuine, some hesitant, but I accepted it all. Because it wasn't for them. It was for me. After the toast, my mother approached. She said nothing at first. Then finally, in a voice low enough to pass as humility, "You really have become something." I looked at her. The woman who told me once that no one would want to marry someone like me. The woman who believed softness was weakness and passion was drama. "I didn't become something," I said, voice steady. "I unbecame everything you told me I had to be. And that's when my life began." Her face didn't crumble, but it didn't resist the truth either. She just nodded, and that was enough. Later, as I stepped outside into the cool air, Noah was waiting in the car. "How was it?" he asked, leaning to kiss my hand. I slid in, my heart surprisingly light. "I reclaimed my name," I whispered, "and not just the name on my birth certificate. The name they used like a blade, the name they associated with failure, the name they never said with pride." I had taken it back. And now it meant power. It meant healing, it meant me. If you've ever walked into a room where you once felt small, if you've ever had to wear your own skin like armor against the people who gave it to you, then you know this truth. You can reclaim your space, your voice, your story, and when you do, you don't just change your life, you change the narrative they used to control you, and that is its own kind of revolution. 3 weeks after the wedding, my phone rang late in the evening. It was my sister. I hadn't heard her voice in over a year. Not since the last conversation where she casually told me that I shouldn't let success get to my head. That maybe I should slow down a little before people start thinking I'm trying to prove something. It had always been like that with her. Erica, the shining daughter, the one who could do no wrong. The one our mother praised even when she failed, and the one I was always being compared to. So when I saw her name on my screen, I hesitated. But curiosity has a way of leaning in. Hello. There was a pause, a breath, and then her voice, familiar and uncertain. Hey, it's me. I know, I said. She laughed nervously. Right, I guess that was dumb. I said nothing. I need to ask you something, she continued, her voice quickly shifting to that breathless tone she used when she wanted something but didn't want to sound like she did. I've started this wellness brand, just local at first, but we're thinking national in a few months. A friend of mine said you might know someone at Venturebrook Capital, and I know your husband's firm just did a partnership with them, so I figured maybe you could introduce me. There it was. Not how are you? Not I saw your TED Talk, and I'm proud of you. Just straight to the ask. Straight to the door she never helped build, but now expected to walk through. Let me tell you something about growing up. About growing up, invisible. You learn to hold your breath in rooms that never even noticed you were gasping. And when you finally make it to the surface, when you finally breathe on your own, some people will come back, not to celebrate you, but to benefit from the oxygen you created. I leaned back in my chair, the city lights glinting off the glass behind me. You want me to use my husband's contacts, I said slowly, to help you launch your business? I mean just an introduction, she said, rushing now. Just a foot in the door. I've got everything else handled, I promise. I remembered all the times she told me I was too intense, all the times she rolled her eyes at my goals, at my ideas, at my refusal to settle. I remembered when she told a group of relatives, Natalie's just trying to prove she's better than us. And now she wanted my help. Because I had become better in ways she hadn't imagined. Not out of spite, but out of fire. I'm going to be honest with you, Erica, I said, calm and unwavering. I've spent years healing from the way you and Mom treated me. Years rebuilding a version of myself that you all tried to flatten. She said nothing. I'm not going to open a door for someone who used to slam them in my face. There was a sharp silence, then her voice, brittle. Wow. So that's it? All this empowerment talk and you're just like everyone else, selfish? No, I said gently. I'm not selfish, I'm selective. I know what it costs to build something from nothing. And I know the difference between support and opportunism. She scoffed. You think you're above us now? No, I said again. I think I'm no longer beneath you. Click. She hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't even doubt myself, because there's a kind of peace that comes with saying no, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. You don't owe access to people who never believed in your ability to rise. You don't have to carry guilt just because you've outgrown the version of yourself they were comfortable mocking. You can be compassionate and still have boundaries. You can be kind and still walk away. Later that night, I sat beside Noah on the couch, the weight of that conversation settling somewhere between my collarbone and my gut. He reached over, handed me a mug of chamomile, and asked quietly, "Do you regret it?" "No," I whispered. "I regret all the times I said yes when I should have said no. Tonight was just overdue." He kissed my forehead. "Proud of you. If you've ever struggled to set boundaries with family, if you've ever been made to feel like protecting your peace is betrayal, let me remind you, distance is not punishment, it's protection. You don't need to explain your growth to people who've made a career out of doubting you. And you never have to water yourself down to be digestible for people who only ever had a taste for control. Say no, even when your voice shakes. Especially when it doesn't single quotes T, because that no, that's the sound of you finally choosing you. It was a cold Thursday evening when I agreed to dinner with my father. He'd asked twice before, once through my mother, once via a stiff email with no punctuation and a subject line that read simply, dinner. I'd ignored both. But something about the third message caught me off guard. It was short, honest, no manipulation. "You're not the daughter." I understood. "But I'd like to, if you'll let me." That didn't mean I trusted him, but it meant I saw an opening, a moment when someone who had only ever looked through me was offering, perhaps for the first time, to actually see me. So I said yes. We met at a quiet restaurant near the water, somewhere neutral. Not the steakhouse he used to drag us to when I was younger, where girls were expected to sit straight and smile politely while the men ordered for us. No, this was my choosing. Quiet jazz, warm lighting, a corner table away from scrutiny. He was already there when I arrived, wearing that same old beige coat and the expression of a man who hadn't decided if this was a meeting or an apology. We sat in silence for a while, the clinking of cutlery and low murmur of other patrons filling the space between us. Finally, he said, "You look like your mother when she was your age." I smiled faintly. She used to say I looked nothing like her. She said a lot of things. We let that hang for a moment. He shifted, cleared his throat. "I'm not very good at this." I took a sip of wine. "You don't say." He laughed soft, unsure, but it was the first honest sound I'd heard from him in years. "Look," he said, "I've been doing a lot of thinking. About the way we raised you. The things I said, or didn't say." I stared at him, this man who once told me that emotions made me unfit for leadership, who accused me of being dramatic every time I cried, who praised Erica's every breath while treating mine like noise. "I think I got it wrong," he said. There it was, 4 words. Not an excuse, not a justification, just truth. "You did get it wrong," I said quietly. "I needed a father, not a supervisor." He winced, and I didn't pull back. I didn't soften because my whole life I'd been editing my feelings to make others comfortable. Tonight, I wasn't cutting a single sentence. "I didn't need you to be impressed," I continued. "I needed you to believe in me before the world did, and you didn't." He exhaled slowly. "I know." The pause that followed wasn't empty. It was full of all the years I spent chasing a kind of approval that only ever came in crumbs. Full of late nights where I questioned if I was too much or not enough. Full of birthday cards that arrived late with signatures but no messages. He looked at me then, really looked, and his voice was small, worn. "I didn't know how to love a daughter who didn't need my permission." That cut deeper than I expected because the truth is, I did need him once, but I stopped waiting. I built without his permission, without his praise, without his blueprint, and he had missed it all. We didn't stay long. Just long enough for the food to get cold, and the conversation to get warm. Just long enough for me to say the things I'd once rehearsed in tears. Just long enough for him to say, "I'm proud of you." Without being prompted, I didn't say it back. Not out of spite, but because I needed him to understand that being proud of me wasn't a favor. It was overdue. On the walk back to my car, he stopped and looked out at the water. "You remind me of my mother," he said. That startled me. He never talked about her. She was stubborn as hell, fierce, brilliant. My father didn't know what to do with her either. I watched him, a man who once punished my strength, now recognizing its origin, and maybe just maybe its value. "I wish I'd seen you sooner," he said. I placed my hand on the car door, paused. "You did see me," I said softly. "You just didn't recognize what you were looking at." I drove home without music, letting the silence settle like dust on old memories. When I walked in, Noah looked up from the couch. "Well?" he asked. "I think he's trying," I said. "It doesn't erase everything, but it's a start." Noah wrapped me in his arms. "You deserve the kind of love that doesn't need to be earned." I closed my eyes. I'm learning that, slowly, but I'm learning. If you've ever had to teach someone how to love you after they failed to do so, you've ever faced a parent not as a child desperate for praise, but as a woman who has already become, then you know the quiet power of not needing an apology to validate your worth, but receiving one anyway. That's the closure you never thought would come. And whether it fixes the past or not, it softens the future. The first time I stood in front of a crowd and told my story, I nearly choked on the silence. It was 5 years ago, at a tiny conference in a half-lit room with plastic chairs and lukewarm coffee. 20 people, maybe, but I shook like it was a stadium. Back then, I spoke not to inspire but to survive. I needed to hear my own voice declare that I had made it through, that I was more than someone else's leftover doubt. Now, I stood in front of 500 guests at the National Women's Leadership Gala, a sold-out ballroom. Chandeliers glittering above, like constellations, and rows of white linen tables, filled with CEOs, senators, artists, and activists. They had asked me to deliver the keynote. I wore a deep navy gown, the kind that didn't hide a single inch of who I had become. And then, just before stepping on stage, I saw her. My mother, sitting in the middle of the room, next to a local newspaper editor she had once tried to impress by downplaying my accomplishments. She wasn't supposed to be there. I hadn't invited her. Apparently, The board had extended tickets to all past Notable Mothers of the Year recipients. She had one back in the 90s, a legacy slot. Ironic our eyes met. Briefly, she didn't smile. Neither did I. But for the first time in my life, I didn't flinch under her gaze. I rose in it. Good evening, I said into the microphone, my voice clear, steady. My name is Natalie Jameson, and I am proof that silence doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes, it's strategy. The room went still. I was raised in a home where approval was conditional, where my ambitions were called attitude, and where love had terms I could never quite meet. A soft ripple passed through the audience. My family used to say I was too much, too loud, too emotional, too ambitious. They told me no one would ever want to marry someone like me. A few heads turned toward where my mother sat. I didn't care. I believed them. For a while, I shrank. I made myself small to fit into the fragile spaces they gave me. Until one day, I realized there was nothing noble about making yourself digestible for people with no appetite for your truth. The applause was low at first, then grew, but I didn't get here because I fought back. I got here because I built forward. I didn't rise to prove them wrong. I rose to prove myself right. I paused, let that settle. I am now the founder of a nonprofit that supports first-generation college students, a mentor to women who were told they were too much. And yes, I am married to a man who is more impressed by my mind than by my obedience. Laughter. Applause. I scanned the room, but didn't look at her. Not yet. I say this not as a victory lap, I continued, but as an invitation. If you've ever felt dismissed, silenced, or undervalued, let this be the moment you stop asking permission to become. Let this be the day you decide. They don't get to define your worth anymore. Standing ovation, but the only applause I cared about was mine. After the speech, I stepped off stage into a blur of handshakes and flashes, so many women hugging me, thanking me, crying. But there she was again, my mother, waiting in the shadows like a ghost from a book I stopped rereading. I walked over, no rush, no need to. She looked older than I remembered. Tired in a way that went beyond age. That was quite a speech, she said. Thank you, I replied, calm. You always did have a way with words. I didn't realize. Her voice trailed off. You didn't want to realize, I said gently. You chose not to see me. She looked down, and for once, there was no defense. No eye roll. No clever redirect. Only a quiet, painful truth between us. I didn't think it would hurt, she said finally. Watching you become everything I never thought you'd be. And there it was. Not remorse. Not quite. But recognition. She knew now. She knew. What she had failed to nurture. What she had missed, and maybe that was the only apology I would ever get. I nodded slowly. I don't need you to be proud. I told her. I need me to be proud. She blinked but didn't answer, and I walked away. Not because I hated her, but because I had outgrown her shadow, and I had a room full of women to celebrate with. You may never get the apology you deserve. You may never hear the words you've cried for in silence. But you don't need their regret to validate your rise. You don't need their hands to crown your becoming. You get to choose your worth, and when you finally do, even the people who once buried you will have no choice but to sit and watch you bloom. A year after the gala, I mailed my mother an envelope. No return address, no handwritten note, begging for recognition, just a single, printed card on heavy cream stock, gold embossed lettering, classy, unapologetic. You are cordially invited to the annual Empower Her Summit, hosted by Natalie Jameson Foundation. Keynote: The value of unconditional love and what happens when it's absent. I didn't know if she'd come. And honestly, I didn't care. This wasn't about reconciliation, it was about truth, visibility, and letting her see that the daughter she tried to reshape into something palatable had become a woman who no longer needed to be digested, just respected. The event was held in the heart of Chicago's business district, a space filled with light, draped in white florals, buzzing with the quiet, beautiful hum of self-made women arriving in silk and steel. It wasn't about the glamour. It was about the presence, about filling a space no one ever saved for us. My foundation had grown, now sponsoring over 500 women through mentorship, education, and startup capital. We had a team, a movement, a message. You do not have to wait to be chosen. Choose yourself first. That night, after my closing speech, I stood at the top of the reception stairs, wine glass in hand. And there she was again, my mother. She stood at the edge of the room, holding the invitation like it was a verdict. She didn't approach. She just watched, and I didn't walk toward her either. Because that's what daughters of mothers like mine learn to do. We learn not to beg for closeness. That feels like a transaction. We learn that proximity does not equal support, but I didn't shut her out. When the crowd parted, I nodded, not out of obligation, but as a woman who had built a kingdom from stone. Later that evening, someone told me she had walked the halls of the summit. Looking at the photos of the girls we'd helped, the walls filled with quotes from survivors, dreamers, builders. They said she stood in front of a quote from my very first interview. Sometimes what you survive becomes your source. My silence. That was never weakness, it was gestation. She read that line again and again, and I like to believe something in her cracked open. But maybe not. Some people grow, some people shrink. What mattered is I wasn't waiting for her to meet me halfway anymore. A few weeks after the summit, she sent me a letter, handwritten. Careful, she didn't say sorry, but she said this. I thought strength meant silence. I thought mothering meant molding. I see now what I failed to water grew roots without me. I don't know if I deserve to witness the garden. But I hope you know, I see it now. I see you. I didn't cry when I read it. I didn't crumble, but I felt a soft shift inside me, not forgiveness. Exactly, but peace. Maybe the kind that grows in the soil of your own becoming. You see, we don't always get closure tied in a perfect bow. Sometimes, closure is just knowing you can finally walk past the door they locked you out of, and you don't even want to go in anymore. Sometimes, it's realizing that the love you begged for was never the kind that could have held your full, radiant self anyway. And sometimes, it's sending them an invitation not for their sake, but to remind yourself, you don't need to disappear to be accepted. You don't need their belief to build your legacy. You don't need their warmth to keep your fire going. You are enough, even if they never say it, especially if they never do. So if you're watching this, yes, you're still carrying the weight of someone else's small vision of who you're allowed to be. Put it down. Let them live in their lack. You have kingdoms to build, books to write, companies to lead, hearts to heal, including your own. Don't wait for their approval. You are already the proof.